Need your daily fix on mixed martial arts?
We're going to kind of recap Bellator 155.
From UFC 198.
Who's who?
Kind of a controversial decision.
And who's not.
I couldn't figure out why, and then it hit me.
Well, don't you fret, because Golden State Media Concepts got you covered. Get your daily dose of MMA podcast. Everything from the UFC, Bellator Fighting Championship, Extreme Cage Fighting, Invicta Fighting Championships, and so much more. Join us as we talk about some of the biggest names in mixed martial arts. We've got you covered here on Golden State Media Concepts MMA Podcast.
Thank you for tuning into the GSMC MMA Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Arnel, and hopefully you are doing fine for yourself. You, your friends, your family, whether you live in the States or internationally, you are doing fine during a time of major uncertainty here. But one thing that was certain was UFC 249 was great. It was a fun overall show. I miss my mixed martial arts action, and it was really tiring watching old replays of watching old baseball games, watching old basketball games. I've had to rewatch a bunch of Kobe Bryant games on ESPN a lot. No, it's not been so fun. It's been very, very sad. But you know what? I finally get to see some mixed martial arts action, which was very. I'm gonna note some stuff here about UFC 249 before I get to the actual show itself. Was that they were doing a marathon of a bunch of martial arts kung fu stuff for the UFC show. So, if you subscribe to the UFC Fight Pass, not only do you get exclusive video footage of the fighters training, or video footage of them traveling, or video footage of them doing interviews. Not only on top of that, you're also gonna see a bunch of kung fu movies marathon. And when I say kung fu movies, I don't mean modern kung fu movies. I mean schlock that the Wu-Tang Clan would obviously be huge fans of. You see guys jumping off invisible wires straight up from the 80s. There's a movie called Clones of Bruce Lee. This super obscure movie that has 3 clones of Bruce Lee's, and they're fighting against bronze men who are the only way to defeat the bronze men is through feeding them grass. And then there's an evil scientist who wants to take over the world. It's Clones of Bruce Lee wasn't there, but it's in the same level of Clones of Bruce Lee, where you got these crazy Fu Manchu looking guys here throwing out magical mystical balls, wearing these gigantic hats. It looks absolutely ridiculous. So before UFC 249, I was watching a marathon of the most craziest kung fu schlock you're ever gonna see from the 80s and 70s. It's it definitely is strange because they just added that recently in the past 2 weeks. So so yeah, if you go for a UFC Fight Pass, you get all the exclusive mixed martial arts stuff and a bunch of really obscure kung fu movies. That to me is hilarious. And then, so before I talk about also the UFC main card here, I want to give a brief shout out to Bryce Mitchell versus Charles Rosa. That was definitely fun. That was a fun one. The early prelim card that had Ryan Spann versus Sam Alvey and Bryce Mitchell versus Charles Rosa. Ryan Spann versus Sam Alvey was a really fun fight. One of the best fights of the entire night. This entire card was full of really good fights, but that was a huge standout for me for being a great fight that had back and forth action. Bryce Mitchell versus Charles Rosa. That was a showcase of Bryce Mitchell more than anyone else. To be honest with you, Bryce Mitchell, his wrestling game was so good. He's most known for his run during the Ultimate Fighter, and here it was a huge showcase of his wrestling ability, and honestly, it was really enjoyable. It was really great. And Bryce Mitchell was a cardio machine in this fight. He could have wrestled insanely well for himself for the next 2 extra rounds, really. He really could have. The dude had a great gas tank, impressive performance, without a doubt. Charles Rosa did his best, but his ground game just wasn't good enough to go up against someone like Bryce Mitchell. So yeah, it was a great showcase for someone. If you wanna be excited for an up and coming fighter, going through the ranks, he's only 25 years old. Look up Bryce Mitchell versus Charles Rosa. That will be a very impressive. He's a very impressive fighter, and that fight was a really impressive showcase, really, more than anything else here. And so let's talk about the main event here, and that was Justin Gaethje versus Tony Ferguson. Wow, this fight was exciting. It was great. It was everything that people predicted. a Justin Gaethje versus Tony Ferguson fight was. Except, one thing a lot of people did not predict in this fight was how accurate of a fighter Justin Gaethje was when he fought against Tony Ferguson. I didn't really expect that. When I looked at Ferguson versus Gaethje, I predicted Ferguson defeating Gaethje off the basis that Gaethje only had 5 weeks prep time to go fight somebody as dynamic of a striker as Ferguson. I don't think Gaethje has fought anybody who's as good as a striker as Ferguson, and I say it is ridiculous for Gaethje to prep up 5 weeks in advance to go up against the number one contender for the lightweight title, and has been undefeated for 10 years. So I thought because it was such a huge mountain to climb for Gaethje, and he had such a short amount of prep time, I didn't think he would be ready to fight someone like Ferguson. But instead, really, Gaethje, this was the best Justin Gaethje I've ever seen. His cornerman did a really great job. I clap for his cornerman and his training camp for telling Gaethje like how to fight, because there were brief moments in his fights that looked like the tide could be turning for Ferguson coming in. It was around the end of the third round. It's like end of third and fourth round where Ferguson was. He might be making a comeback. He might be going for a second win. Gaethje was pummeling Ferguson for about 3 straight rounds, but then in the second half of the third round, Ferguson started finding his shots. He started lighting up though. Gaethje got a bloody lip. It really felt like Ferguson was prepping himself for a comeback here. But then his cornermen, Justin Gaethje's cornermen, were like, "Okay, Justin, you need to go and stop trying to aim for these like mega kill blow shots. You got to go for accuracy. You can go swing at him a couple times here and fight recklessly at some moments, but for the most part, try to be accurate in your shots." And Gaethje transitioned by the end of the third round. He stopped being this fighter who's like throwing out these insane haymakers into buying his time, counter fighting, and he's only going to throw out the haymakers when Ferguson goes in for a shot. So Gaethje, I thought it was a really great job by Gaethje's cornerman here more than anything else. And he's like, okay, because Ferguson by the second half of the third round was starting to hit some clean shots on him. Ferguson was getting some second. He was getting some clean hits onto Gaethje, and then Gaethje adjusted himself going to the fourth and fifth round, in that he became more of a defensive fighter. During the fourth and fifth round here, he was backing off a lot. He was being very patient. He only striked when Tony Ferguson looked like he was about to strike himself. So when Ferguson was going to go for a straight jab, Gaethje will go duck under, go for right haymaker, then end it off with a kick. I also give great praise here for Justin Gaethje's kicks. Gaethje is mostly known for his boxing ability and his ability to defend takedowns. Gaethje did really well in his combinations here. So in every combination Gaethje would go do, it would either be a 1-2 left jab right haymaker, or a right jab left haymaker left hook, or it would go, or something that definitely got Ferguson throughout every exchange was that Gaethje would go for a low kick, would then duck under, go for a right hook, or he'll go for a right jab, duck under, go for a left kick. Justin Gaethje's kicks were doing a whole number on Ferguson in several moments throughout this entire fight. It looked like Ferguson was about to slip and fall, not because Ferguson himself was slipping because the floor was wet or he just lost balance, but because Justin Gaethje's kicks did so good that Ferguson stopped being a fighter who was very bouncy, who's very quick, who's very elusive, into being more of a stationary fighter. Joe Rogan made note of it, though, that Gaethje, he was doing really well for himself in these 50-50 closed-in exchanges, which a lot of people predicted Tony Ferguson would be doing really well for himself. If you were to ask me who would win well in these like close 50-50 exchanges, who would do well in the clinch game, who would do really well for themselves when both fighters get really tight and close, I say Ferguson beats out Gaethje in that most of the time. If these fighters were very, very close to each other, and like who would win out in the striking exchanges, I would go for Ferguson. Who would win out in the long range fighting and poking, I would say Ferguson. The only thing that I thought Justin Gaethje had over Ferguson was the wrestling ability and being able to fight in the mid range, being able to fight a little bit halfway inside the pocket of Ferguson. But no, Gaethje was able to go and defeat Ferguson in every aspect. He was able to outpoke Ferguson from outside the pocket. He was really good at going inside the pocket and going in for some dirty boxing, going for some clinching. He was able to throw low kicks and high uppercuts and like right hooks very close in the distance, which is where you thought, which is like, you would tell Justin Gaethje before the fight, hey, Gaethje, do not try to close the distance against Ferguson, because Ferguson's going to throw in some elbows. But Tony Ferguson didn't throw that much elbows at all. He threw one spinning reverse elbow, and then Gaethje blocked it, and then from that point on, there was no noteworthy single elbow that Ferguson was able to do. So really, Gaethje is completely outclassed Ferguson here, and he became the new interim lightweight champion. And I didn't predict that. Ferguson was coming into the fight as a favorite. I predicted Ferguson winning, but Justin Gaethje, he impressed the heck out of me. This is the best Justin Gaethje I've ever seen, and I'm excited to see what is next for Justin Gaethje. Probably he's going to fight against Khabib Nurmagomedov, and that will be a fun fight to see. You're listening to the GSMC MMA Podcast, coming back right after the short break, analyzing UFC 249.
You really can't underestimate the importance of having the right creative work for your brand or your product. Whether it's a logo, a website, a book cover, or an ad campaign, you really need a quality design to make that big difference pop and deliver your overall engagement and success in a competitive market. That's where Design Crowd comes in. Design Crowd has over 750,000 designers from Sydney to San Francisco ready to help you with awesome creative ideas. They make crowdsourcing work for you. So if you need a logo or you're working on your creative branding, you can go to designcrowd.com and post a brief describing the design you need. And then within about 2 to 7 days, you'll receive up to over 100 different designs from designers around the world. Then you pick the best design and approve payment to the designer. So you're only paying for the design that you want. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of freelancing and out of crowdsourcing. And you don't have to be a huge company like Harvard Business School to use Design Crowd, although they have used it as well. You can start a project on Design Crowd for as little as $99. And if you go right now to designcrowd.com/health and wellness or enter the promo code health and wellness on their website, then our health and wellness listeners will receive up to $150 off of your design project. That's designcrowd.com/health and wellness or entering that promo code health and wellness.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
And welcome back here. So I just discussed Justin Gaethje versus Tony Ferguson. That was a hell of a fight. Very, very fun fight. Arguably fight of the night, in my personal opinion. But it was a great fight. I recommend everyone to see it. It really was a classic, in my personal opinion. Was it better than Weili Zhang versus Ioana Jędrzejczyk? Not in my opinion. I thought that fight was a lot more better. A lot more back and forth action here. But Gaethje defeated Tony Ferguson in basically every round. There's not a single round in this fight to which Justin Gaethje was dominating Tony Ferguson. But Tony Ferguson, the guy is a walking zombie. Oh my goodness. That dude take the... Joe Rogan and Daniel Cormier noted that every single time Ferguson was punched in the face and the end of the round, Ferguson would walk away and he wouldn't even be sitting down. He'd be standing up and if you look at his stomach, he's not even breathing that heavily. Like Ferguson, here's the thing. Ferguson, he didn't even fall down in his knockout. He technically did lose through TKO, but he didn't fall over. He didn't. Like, I'm a firm believer that Justin Gaethje could continually punch Ferguson 50 more times, 100 more times, and Ferguson, for as messed up as his face would be, he still wouldn't fall down because he's that much of a zombie. And it was the right call for the referee to stop Ferguson from fighting, because there was no way Ferguson was going to make a comeback. in that fifth round, Justin Gaethje, in 3 minutes and 39 seconds within the fifth round, Gaethje landed one insane punch onto Ferguson's face, and then Ferguson, started. Joe Rogan said it best. He said Tony Ferguson looked like he was fighting this drunken master style from Jackie Chan. Tony Ferguson was wobbly, his face was all weird, he spit out blood. He wasn't even looking at Gaethje, he was looking somewhere else, but he was still standing. And then the referee just shook his head. Herb Dean shook his head. He was like, okay, no, we're not gonna let this happen, okay? And Ferguson, there's no point in continuing this fight. The truth is, there was no point in continuing this fight. Gaethje defeated Ferguson, and for as much as I'd love to see a comeback victory, it was very, very unlikely we're going to see a comeback victory, and it was the best thing for Ferguson to be stopped at, and for Gaethje winning the fight through TKO. It was really impressive. But now we're thinking, what is next for Ferguson and Gaethje? It was expected that Ferguson would win this fight and become a 2-time interim lightweight champion. But not anymore then, and considering how bad Ferguson got wrecked in this fight, Weili Zhang and Ioana Jędrzejczyk, they're both out. Those two fighters are out. Ferguson, just like those two fighters, should definitely be out for the rest of the year, because that war he had with Gaethje was insane. So I don't expect Ferguson to come back at all at some point in this year. I expect him to make a comeback fight by middle of 2021 next year. That's when I expect Ferguson to come back. I also don't even expect Conor McGregor to come back. So my prediction would be, because I said this in other episodes, where the entire lightweight division could be built around Gaethje, Ferguson, Khabib, and Conor. Those four fighters can have interchanging fights and bouts against each other multiple times, and it would be money without a doubt. And so, since Justin Gaethje is the current interim lightweight champion, he's challenged Khabib Nurmagomedov in the post fight interview, where Joe Rogan was interviewing Gaethje, hey, what's next for you in your career? Justin Gaethje says he wants to do a USA versus Russia fight versus Dagestan. He wants to represent America as he fights against Khabib Nurmagomedov. In the bottom left of the screen for UFC 249, they'd always show tweets from noteworthy people. For some reason, they showed Logan Paul's tweet. I don't know why. But they showed tweets of fighters, analysts, former fighters. And they showed Khabib Nurmagomedov a tweet. Justin Gaethje says he wants to fight against Khabib. Khabib's response on Twitter on UFC 249 was, no comments. And then right afterwards, a couple minutes later, after the show was over, Khabib says he's excited for Justin Gaethje. Congratulations, that was a great fight. Logically, the next best step here would be Gaethje versus Khabib Nurmagomedov. And even though Gaethje, so I'm sorry for Justin Gaethje here. I'm sorry for saying this, but favorite of this fight would have to be Khabib. Justin Gaethje will come into the fight against Khabib as the underdog, and it's understandable why people would say Khabib would go win the fight. I say Khabib can win the fight, but without a doubt, Justin Gaethje can defeat Khabib. I don't doubt it. If Khabib and Justin Gaethje were to fight 100 times, I can guarantee you Justin Gaethje might beat out Khabib a handful of times. But for the most part, majority of the time, I say Khabib would defeat Justin Gaethje. And the reason for this is, and so while those two are matched up, I say Tony Ferguson should fight against Conor McGregor. I think that right there is a money fight. I think the two best fighters of the division as of right now are Justin Gaethje and Khabib Nurmagomedov, and it is only fair that the interim lightweight champion has to go fight the undisputed lightweight champion. And Justin Gaethje has mauled over everybody on his path into being the number one contender, so it is the right choice for Gaethje to fight against Khabib. Meanwhile, since Tony Ferguson's out of it, and there's no way we can expect Tony Ferguson to fight against Justin Gaethje or Khabib, and he might come back by middle of next year, and there's no reports going on that Conor McGregor is going to fight at some point this year, I predict Tony Ferguson versus Conor McGregor, or it can be Conor McGregor versus somebody else in a tune-up fight by the end of this year, and then it becomes Tony Ferguson versus Conor McGregor by the middle of next year. That's how I predict fight. Where are these fights going to go? So I say Khabib is going to defeat Justin Gaethje when the two do end up fighting. Do I know when these two are going to fight? I really am unsure. Justin Gaethje's a warrior. He had 5 weeks prep time to fight against one of the best fighters in the entire world against Tony Ferguson. Khabib says he's expected to come back by the end of this year. He predicted himself that it would be around September. Chances are he would be competing in the December UFC pay-per-view. So Khabib he might be returning in the December UFC pay-per-view, which leaves Justin Gaethje 7 months prep time to prep up against Khabib Nurmagomedov, along with his break after fighting against Tony Ferguson. So Justin Gaethje has a fair amount to go prep up against Khabib Nurmagomedov. Khabib has enough prep time to prep up against Justin Gaethje. I can see these two fighting in December, and if Gaethje were to win this, it would be the biggest, 2020, for as bad as it is for millions and millions of people out there in the world, it would be a great year for Justin Gaethje. And then Tony Ferguson versus Conor McGregor. I don't really know who's going to win that fight. Tony Ferguson versus Conor McGregor. Ferguson is a lot like Nate Diaz in the fact that they're both walking zombies. They're both nearly impossible to knock out unless the referee comes in and says, okay, no, this isn't going to happen, or it's going to end up by decision. Ferguson versus Conor McGregor, my money would have to be on... Thing is, Conor McGregor is probably the hardest hitting top ranked lightweights in the entire UFC right now. So how well can Tony Ferguson handle the punches of Conor McGregor? I'm not really sure, but as proven here, Justin Gaethje threw out some hard haymakers that would knock out every man out there. Gaethje unloaded a whole lot of shots onto Ferguson that to an ordinary human being, they would be absolutely, their face would be smashed in and they would be knocked out and they'd be gone for the entire day. And so for Ferguson versus Conor McGregor, that's a complete toss-up. I really don't know who's going to win that one. My money on that fight would have to be Tony Ferguson because unlike Justin Gaethje, Conor McGregor doesn't have the cardio that matches Gaethje. Both of those fighters hit hard. I say Conor McGregor hits harder than Justin Gaethje, but Conor McGregor's gas tank only goes up to the third round. And Ferguson, here's the situation with Ferguson. Ferguson, even after getting pummeled every single round, still had great cardio with him. He was a little bit bouncy. He was still going at it. He was always the aggressor in every single exchange when he was for Ferguson and Justin Gaethje. Every single time, it was always Gaethje who was moving back. Even when Gaethje was pummeling Ferguson, it was because Gaethje was moving backwards. And so, Conor McGregor versus Ferguson, my pick in that fight would be Ferguson, off the base that Ferguson has better cardio, and I think he can survive the onslaught that Conor McGregor can give him, and Conor McGregor will slow down by the third round. Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Justin Gaethje, for that matchup here, I have to go for Khabib Nurmagomedov because as of this point, even though Justin Gaethje has great defensive wrestling, there's been no one at this point who's out-wrestled Khabib Nurmagomedov. So until I see it, then I'll be a believer. So you're listening to the GSMC MMA Podcast, and I'm going to analyze the rest of this UFC 249 card, and we'll be back right after this short break here. See you soon.
You really can't underestimate the importance of having the right creative work for your brand or your product. Whether it's a logo, a website, a book cover, or an ad campaign, you really need a quality design to make that big difference pop and deliver your overall engagement and success in a competitive market. That's where Design Crowd comes in. Design Crowd has over 750,000 designers from Sydney to San Francisco ready to help you with awesome creative ideas. They make crowdsourcing work for you. So if you need a logo or you're working on your creative branding, you can go to designcrowd.com and post a brief describing the design you need. And then within about 2 to 7 days, you'll receive up to over 100 different designs from designers around the world. Then you pick the best design and approve payment to the designer. So you're only paying for the design that you want. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of freelancing and out of crowdsourcing. And you don't have to be a huge company like Harvard Business School to use Design Crowd, although they have used it as well. You can start a project on Design Crowd for as little as $99. And if you go right now to designcrowd.com/health and wellness or enter the promo code health and wellness on their website, then our health and wellness listeners will receive up to $150 off of your design project. That's designcrowd.com/health and wellness or entering that promo code health and wellness.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
And we are back. So the co-main event was Henry Cejudo versus Dominic Cruz defending his bantamweight title. While Justin Gaethje was able to go win the interim title, it was Dominic Cruz who wanted to go win the bantamweight title, making his big comeback victory here, making his big comeback return after 4 years. This is going to be a huge Cinderella story for Dominic Cruz if he defeat Henry Cejudo. But sadly, that didn't turn out for him, and instead it became a controversial finish. Henry Cejudo defeated Dominic Cruz in the second round, 4 minutes 50 seconds in. Dominic Cruz was only 2 seconds away from the bell being rung and then going to the third round, to which the fight was actually shifting over towards Dominic Cruz potentially, and by a couple seconds in the end of the second round here. And so what happened here? Henry Cejudo versus Dominic Cruz. Dominic Cruz, his footwork is absolutely amazing. There's no fighter out there in the UFC who I've seen in the past or currently right now who fights the way Dominic Cruz is fighting. I gotta tell you right now, Dominic Cruz, he does not have ring rust. He really doesn't. Cruz fights like he always has. His footwork is really great. Dominic Cruz said Henry Cejudo doesn't stand a chance against Cruz because Henry Cejudo is prepping up to fight against Jose Aldo. Jose Aldo is more of a stationary fighter, much more of a linear fighter, while Dominic Cruz always loves to move around. He bounces around. He tries to go circle his opponents. He tries to apply pressure. He tries to poke Henry Cejudo. Henry Cejudo, being the very patient fighter he is, was more of a statue. He was like a rock. He was stationary. He was slowly moving towards Dominic Cruz because Henry Cejudo didn't really have to move much because Dominic Cruz was doing all the moving for him. Dominic Cruz would try to poke Henry Cejudo as much as he can with jabs or with kicks, but every time Cruz was about to be aggressive or about to lean in for a strike, I predicted that in this fight it would be Dominic Cruz running around poking Henry Cejudo, and Henry Cejudo has to time his shots in order to go defeat Cruz. Because that's how Cody Garbrandt defeated Dominic when they fought. Cody Garbrandt barely moved in his fight against Cruz. It was mostly Dominic moving around, circling Cruz, and circling Cody Garbrandt, and then Cody Garbrandt has to time it perfectly, has to go time his counter punches perfectly as Dominic Cruz is going in for a jab or for a body kick. And that's what Henry Cejudo did. Henry Cejudo fought similar to Dominic Cruz, except for the fact that instead of trying to go for the knockout hit or for the knockout punches, Henry Cejudo was going in for kicks. He was trying to slow down Dominic Cruz, and he did a really good job at it. As Dominic Cruz would go leaning for a jab, Henry Cejudo would duck under, or before even Cruz attempts the jab, he would go in for a leg kick, and Henry Cejudo would keep chopping down Cruz, and Cruz would go slow down. Dominic Cruz did end up slowing down by the end of the first round. Cruz became more of a slower paced fighter, and in the second round, it really became back and forth between Henry Cejudo and Dominic Cruz. It could have gone either way. I see the first round easily went to Henry Cejudo. His counter fighting was on point. He did a lot more better. He did a lot more better against Dominic Cruz in the first round compared to the second round. When it came to the second round, then and when the pace slowed down, I thought Henry Cejudo would take advantage of that, but instead Dominic Cruz, he fought very smart. He was getting some clean shots onto Cejudo, and then in the end of the second round, this is where a huge controversy happened. There's an eye poke that happened. There's a headbutt. There's a headbutt that happened. Dominic Cruz and Henry Cejudo during the 50-50 exchanges were they were striking each other, and then they both ducked under, and they both headbutt each other. And in the headbutt, Henry Cejudo was busted up. He was bleeding. So the referee told, hey, break up. Henry Cejudo, come over here. Let's check up your forehead. And then Henry Cejudo, man, whoever was the doctor didn't do a good job clearing up Henry Cejudo's head, because Henry Cejudo was busted. There's just a lot of blood pouring like through the face of Henry Cejudo. And so the doctor checks up on Henry Cejudo. Cejudo's like, "Hey man, I'm perfectly all fine. Yeah, I'm good." Doctor says, "Okay, you're all good." Then Cejudo gets back to his corner. Cejudo's face is all messed up. There's all that blood dripping. Continually, blood is dripping. And then Dominic Cruz shifted his fighting stance. He became a very aggro fighter, going for he started becoming a headhunter, which is weird because Dominic Cruz was not a headhunter throughout the first and second round. He was mostly aiming for body shots. He was aiming for leg kicks, and then all of a sudden, like, he saw the cuts in Henry Cejudo's forehead and became more of a headhunter. And here's the thing: Dominic Cruz was able to get a couple shots onto Cejudo, but Cejudo was able to fight back. He was able to go get a knockdown on towards Dominic Cruz. And then the controversy happens here. Henry Cejudo was pummeling, was on the back of, was pretty much kind of on the back of Dominic Cruz. Dominic Cruz is on the floor. Henry Cejudo is laying down shots onto the back of the head of Dominic Cruz, just ground and pounding Dominic Cruz. But here's the thing, though. Dominic Cruz, the referee stops the fight, and the fight ends via TKO, knee and punches. But Dominic Cruz was never out. He really wasn't. Dominic Cruz was on the cage, and as he was about to stand up, the referee stops the fight. And then Dominic Cruz immediately argues with the referee. And then Joe Rogan, Daniel Cormier, and myself, and like all the fighters who are tweeting out in the bottom left of the screen talking about the fight, they all said that was an early stoppage. And consider the fact that it's a personal thing, like with me that infuriates me a lot with a lot of these fights. Actually, is that Dominic Cruz was only 2 seconds away. He was only 2 seconds away, and by the end, for the second round to end, and if the fight were to, here's the bothering part. The reason why the referee steps in is to protect the fighters. The referee's coming in to protect Dominic Cruz from enduring any more pain. But there was only 2 more seconds left. And at the moment to which the referee stopped the fight, Henry Cejudo's like ground shots started to slow down and obviously became a lot more weaker. And Cruz was managing himself perfectly fine as he was making his way, as he was about to stand up. When he does stand up from both of his feet, the second round pretty much ends, and then Cruz would make his way to the third round. After the fight, Cruz talked to Joe Rogan in a post-fight interview. He said, "Hey, I was doing fine for myself. I wasn't knocked out. It would have been different if Henry Cejudo was laying ground and pound on me, and I was on the floor, and I was barely moving, or I was struggling moving, or it was very obvious that I wasn't making a comeback. But because I was about to stand up, I was leaning on the cage, not because I was knocked out, but because I was about to stand up." That was what Dominic Cruz was arguing. Cruz was arguing that the referee thought he was knocked out, technically knocked out, because he was laying on the cage. Dominic Cruz says the reason why I was on the cage was because I was leaning on it. I was using it as leverage for me to stand up. And I agree with Dominic Cruz in that scenario, though. I agree that Dominic Cruz, he was using the cage as leverage. He wasn't using the cage because he was just laying there because he was actually knocked out. No, Cruz was fine. He wasn't perfectly fine, but he was fine. Henry Cejudo, Joe Rogan told Henry Cejudo, "Hey, do you think the fight was an early stoppage?" And Henry Cejudo, he waved it off. Henry Cejudo compared it to the TJ Dillashaw knockout, which I myself also say that was an early stoppage when Henry Cejudo defeated TJ Dillashaw. Henry Cejudo responded by saying, "You know what, man? All my fights end off being like, oh, people always say it's an early stoppage, but no, I defeated Dominic Cruz. The referee did it. The referee's decision's final. Whatever happens, happens. Oh, by the way, I am retiring. This will be my last fight." And in the background, you see Dominic Cruz and Dana White talking to each other. And then when Henry Cejudo says, "Hey, I'm retired," Henry Cejudo waves his head. Dana White shakes his head with that big grinny fake smile that he does, where you know the fake smile, if something bad happens, if I pinch, there's a thing during elementary school and middle school where we'd go and punch each other or slap each other. And in order to tell the other person, "Hey man, your punch was weak," or your slap was weak, or your pitching was weak, will you just give a smile? That's a tell when you're obviously not comfortable with it. And Henry Cejudo in the post-fight interview said, yeah, Dana White, man, he's saying good job to me. He's giving me the big thumbs up, but obviously he's not happy with it. And it looked obvious that Dana White and Dominick Cruz were not happy with it, because Dominick Cruz could have easily argued for a fight, for a rematch against Henry Cejudo. But you know what, since Henry Cejudo, I say good job for Henry Cejudo then. Like, if he wants to retire, if he wants to live comfortably, that's all him. Good for Henry Cejudo. He's ending his career in a high, double belt champion, gold medalist. His fighting career is done. But but for Dominick Cruz though, I'm pretty sure he's pretty upset about this scenario. Like, oh man, dude, like, what the heck? I was supposed to win this. This was supposed to be my moment. Ah! So you listen to the GSMC MMA Podcast, coming up right after the break here with more of a discussion for UFC 249.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
And welcome back to the podcast here. I was talking about Henry Cejudo versus Dominick Cruz. Henry Cejudo is retiring. Dominick Cruz, right now, I am unsure of what's going to happen to him. The bantamweight title has been relinquished. What's going to happen next? Henry Cejudo says that there should be a small, four-way tournament going on who will go and compete for the bantamweight title between, Peter Yan, Marlon Moraes. He didn't mention Dominick Cruz, Aljamain Sterling. He didn't mention Dominick Cruz at all, though, which is very popping for me, really. He's like, oh, Aljamain Sterling deserves a shot. Marlon Moraes deserves a shot. Peter Yan, he should go fight for the bantamweight belt, but he doesn't name drop Dominick Cruz, and also he doesn't name drop TJ Dillashaw, who's expected to come back at least by the next 2 years. So by the next 2 years. So I don't know what's gonna be happening for the bantamweight title here. I'm pretty sure Dana White, he's got a lot of things going on. I think someone asked Dana White about it, what's gonna happen, what's expected to happen for the bantamweight title, what's gonna happen for the flyweight title. Dana White has said, you know what, there's a lot of things going on right now this month. We have a lot of things we have a lot of cooks in the kitchen right now, and we have to organize everything for the month of May. So, there's the fight cards in May are not even really official yet, and so we're trying to fix all that up, though. When everything goes back to normal, then we're going to deal with the bantamweight situation here. And so, Dominick Cruz, I'm pretty sure his name is going to be in the front line. It's going to be the front, though, in my opinion. Dominick Cruz had a very impressive performance against Henry Cejudo. He impressed me. He impressed a lot of the analysts. He impressed a lot of people on Twitter, former fighters, fight fans, active fighters. Dominick Cruz had a really impressive performance against Henry Cejudo. Sadly, the referee stoppage, I gotta say, it was not right for the fight to end that way. We could see Peter Yan versus Dominick Cruz. We can't see that because initially, Dominick Cruz's original comeback fight was gonna be against Peter Yan. And now the fact that Henry Cejudo is gone, and Henry Cejudo is throwing out Peter Yan's name to being out there, and Peter Yan is a top-ranked fighter, we can see Dominick Cruz versus Peter Yan finally happening, and it could be for the bantamweight title for all we know. It could be for the vacant bantamweight title. We could have Marlon Moraes versus Aljamain Sterling, and then Dominick Cruz versus Peter Yan. We'll have those fights happen. Winner of those two fights are going to go fight each other. And then we'll have an undisputed bantamweight champion. I am happy for Dominick Cruz to make his comeback here because I really do believe that Dominick Cruz, he's in fight shape. He had a really impressive performance, and I don't doubt him continuing to go push for his fight career. I really don't. But we go from the bantamweight, the little guys, to the heavyweights. Fritz and Connor versus Rosenstrike. Oh man. So this was okay. So this probably was the most fun fight for me to watch easily. Not just because it's a 20-second fight. It's a 20-second, very dirty looking fight. It's not the cleanest. It's not the prettiest. And in the 20 seconds of calling this fight, the commentators were just laughing their butt off for this fight here. They really were. Ngannou versus Rozenstruik. How did this fight go? Well, the bell rang. Rozenstruik was doing some kickboxing. He went for a leg kick. He went for a jab, missed. And then Ngannou said, "You know what? No, we are not gonna do this back and forth kickboxing fights. We're not gonna do this like slowed down, methodical pace fight. I'm gonna go there, and I'm gonna just throw out haymakers." And Francis Ngannou threw out the four most ugliest haymakers you can ever see. Like, if you've ever seen like a drunk person in the bar and they're like raging and they want to fight somebody, they're just swinging their arms around. Or if you've ever been like in a rock concert or in a metal concert or in a metal concert, like you always see people like waving their arms. Oh yeah, it's a mosh pit. Yeah, you see people in a mosh pit just waving their arms erratically. There's like no rhythm to it though. It's very erratic, just swinging their arms wildly. That was Francis Ngannou versus Rozenstruik as Ngannou was knocking out Rozenstruik. It was the most cartoony, like arm swinging, no form to it at all. But you know what? Even though there was no form to Ngannou's punches, even if Rozenstruik was just to duck under and lay one really good counterpunch onto Ngannou, that would have been enough to stop Francis. But no, man. Francis Ngannou throws out the four most ugliest haymakers ever that has like 100 overall in knockout power. Knocks out Rozenstruik. Rozenstruik goes on the floor. He flops on the cage. Francis Ngannou lays down four very hard strikes onto Rozenstruik. I think the referee stopped Ngannou a little bit too late there. Destroys Rozenstruik. And then the fight ends. The commentators are laughing their butt off from it though. They're talking about how scary Ngannou is. Daniel Cormier is like, he's kind of back and forth between like, hey man, I can defeat Ngannou. And like, you know what? I don't want to fight Ngannou. It was so hilarious on what was happening in this 20-second fight that I recommend everybody to see it. It is so cartoony, super ridiculous. This entire card is really ridiculous. And it was fun. That's what I gotta say for Ngannou versus Rozenstruik. And I especially like it considering the fact if you're to compare this fight against like Aleksei Oleinik versus persevere, which is what happened during the prelim, which was in the prelim card for ESPN. Night and day, man. Night and day. Aleksei Oleinik versus persevere, that was a sloppy fight. That was not pretty. That was kind of boring. And then you got this short 20-second fight between Ngannou versus Rozenstruik, which was a sloppy fight, and it was just one guy throwing his arms out and destroying Rozenstruik. It was hilarious. It was also very hilarious during the opening package. Yeah, the opening package was weird also. And so the opening package was digitalized for some weird strange reason. It was like Rozenstruik saying, "Hey man, I'm gonna knock out Ngannou, and I'm gonna knock out Ngannou in the first round." And Ngannou's like, "Oh, I'm gonna knock him out in the first round." The hype package for Ngannou versus Rozenstruik was perfect for mid to late 2000s UFC. Because this didn't happen for any fighter at all. No. So Ngannou versus Rozenstruik and Greg Hardy versus Rickon Castro, they pretty much had the exact same promo package compared to everyone else. Because fighters nowadays, they're either pushing for narratives or trying to talk like a pro wrestler, or they're pushing a narrative. They're giving this pro wrestling promo, or they're speaking very eloquently, or they speak very soft. Or they speak with pride, like with humility. When you see Francis Ngannou versus Rozenstruik and Rickon Castro versus Greg Hardy, it was pretty much mumble the mumbler. Like it's just Rozenstruik. Hey Rozenstruik, what do you think of this fight? I'm gonna go defeat Francis in first round and to must watch. Hey Francis, how do you think this fight's gonna end up? I'm gonna go and I'm gonna defeat Rozenstruik in first round and I'm gonna knock it out. Oh my god. It was like, it was so mid to late 2000s UFC. It was overdone. Whoever was editing, I got a bachelor's degree in digital media. And so, to see how they edited those two high packages was so dumb that like if my dad were to watch it, he would just laugh his butt off. He's like, "What is this?" It was great. It really was great. Since I'm talking about Greg Hardy versus Yorgan De Castro, that fight was also sloppy too. It was also sloppy. I have no clue what the strategy was for either fighter. I really don't know. The commentary team of Joe Rogan and Joe Rogan, they're laughing their butt off with this fight also. Here's the thing. Both of them, they laughed. Like, they were going full on Mystery Science Theater riffing the fights when it came to the heavyweights for some reason. And it was mostly because, like, maybe because there was no crowd, Joe Rogan would always say this, is that analyzing these fights are very different because you get to hear everything. And so when you hear Rosenstrike or Greg Hardy or Yorgan De Castro, these guys are heavy breathing. They're like, just like 2 minutes into their fight. It's like ring. 2 minutes later, and then Joe Rogan is like giggling to himself. Daniel Cormier is giggling to himself, and it became really distracting. And they were just riffing Greg Hardy versus Yorgan De Castro. Greg Hardy defeated Yorgan De Castro. Yorgan De Castro pretty much stopped himself from being a good fighter, and that he kicked Greg Hardy's knee. Greg Hardy's knee checked it. Yorgan De Castro just didn't do anything for the second and third round. It was not a pretty fight. It really wasn't. So you're listening to GSMC MMA Podcast. Coming back right after the short break here. I'll be discussing Yorgan De Castro versus Greg Hardy in detail because wow, it definitely was a fight. Coming back after the short break here.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
And welcome back here. So we're discussing UFC 249, Yorgan De Castro versus Greg Hardy. Once again, that's not the most prettiest fight you would ever want to watch, really, more than anything else, because ring, the bell rings, the commentators already laughing their butt off because these two fighters are already breathing out, though. I will say this, Greg Hardy's head movement is really impressive. I'll say Greg Hardy has improved a lot since his first fight in mixed martial arts up to now. Greg Hardy's boxing and his head movement and his comfortability in the octagon has grown exceptionally well. It's really well. Too bad Greg Hardy, though, his boxing is still a lot to be left desired, really. He's got the movement. Okay, so Greg Hardy has a problem that a lot of beginning boxers, and when I had the problem with when I did boxing, was that you're more focused on head movement than you actually are working on your striking. You're more focused on making sure your movement's all out well. You're making sure you're doing the right stances. You're making sure your body is doing what you're telling it to do instead of actually the fights. I felt like Greg Hardy was more focused thinking about his training on how he was supposed to fight against Yorgan De Castro than the actual fight he had against Yorgan De Castro. Yorgan De Castro pretty much like handicapped himself in this fight here. De Castro threw one bad leg kick, which pretty much handicapped him for the entire fight, and then it became kind of a slogfest to watch through, as Greg Hardy was more focused on his positioning and his movement than he actually was fighting, and Yorgan De Castro was very limited in his movement, and he couldn't go push forward for striking, and so Greg Hardy was counter-fighting against Yorgan De Castro, and Yorgan De Castro can't really push forward the action because of his leg injury. So, for the most part, it became more of a staring contest, with Greg Hardy throwing in more jabs, and Yorgan De Castro barely throwing anything in the second half of the second round, and also in the third round. It was even to the point, actually, where Daniel Cormier and Joe Rogan were talking about how they were saying, okay, you know what? These two have thrown so little punches in this round. Yorgan De Castro, I don't know how many punches he's attempted, but I think it's 0. And then both of them are laughing their butts off, saying like, hey, can we have like the stat card? Or can someone hand us a sheet of paper that says like, gives us the numbers? And apparently the fighters were not given any numbers. The commentators weren't given any stats for the fights. There was even no graphic for any of the stats also. because it happens in every single UFC show out there. At the end of every fight, they always show, like total significant strikes, total strikes attempted, total strikes landed, significant strikes, how many strikes landed on the head, how many strikes landed on the leg, how many takedown attempts, how many knockdowns. We don't get any of that. Instead, what we do get though was, you know what? This is the end of the first round. Brought to you by Modelo. So it was very annoying, as a fan to go, okay, can I have the actual numbers here? Because when you look in these, when there are very close type fights here, by the way, out of the 5 fights in the main card, only one of them went to decision, which is very interesting to me. And also there are 2 split decision victories in the prelim cards. So this card really wasn't a slogfest more than anything else. It is a great card. You're going to cash your fight. That became kind of a slogfest because we as fans, we the ones who are watching on TV, and even the announcers, the commentators, we don't know what the numbers are, which kind of left us puzzled and questioning the fight. One fight though that was, in my personal opinion though, was a huge dark horse for being fight of the night here, was Calvin Kattar. I even call him Qatar, but it's Calvin Kattar versus Jeremy Stephens. Jeremy Stephens looks very strange to me. I don't know. I can't really explain why. He looks very thin. So Jeremy Stephens came to this fight 0.5 pounds overweight though, so it was listed under a catch weight fight. And so Calvin Kattar versus Jeremy Stephens here. This is a very fun fight. Jeremy Stephens has that issue again. Once I've been a fan of Jeremy Stephens, but also at the same time I've been infuriated by the guy, and the fact that he seems like he's been fighting the exact same style for a long time. And Jeremy Stephens, despite being a knockout artist, tends to be really passive, and he struggles immensely when it comes towards counterfighting here. Jeremy Stephens is only winning the fight when he's pursuing the action here, but whenever he has to go step backwards, or he has to go defend himself, or has to go for a counterpunch, he doesn't do so. So Calvin Kattar was Jeremy Stephens, Calvin Kattar, it was a back and forth action with the 2. First round could have gone either way, and then it went to the second round here, Calvin Kattar landed Jeremy Stephens with a nasty elbow. One nasty elbow, did some ground pound. He had a TKO victory with elbows and punches. I don't know where Jeremy Stephens goes from here, actually, because of the fact that he's gone, I think his record, including this one, his past 5 fights has been all losses, 1 draw. He hasn't won a fight in about 4 years. So I don't know what's next for Jeremy Stephens. I really don't. Calvin Kattar, though, considering the fact that he had a very impressive victory against Jeremy Stephens on this night with the huge elbow, he has a great gas tank, he's a knockout artist. He's also a very precise striker. He's a very analytical, very quick striker. If you saw Calvin Kattar's performance against Zabit, it was no doubt Zabit's most hardest opponent he's ever fought then. And I think if Calvin Kattar were to fight against Zabit yet again, there's a chance here Calvin Kattar could defeat Zabit, and it's been on the table that there could be a possible rematch for Zabit versus Calvin Kattar, and I'm excited if that fight were to happen. And now the prelim card here, which is on ESPN. This card was stacked from top to bottom here. Main event of the prelim card for ESPN was Anthony Pettis versus Donald Cerrone. The fight ended via unanimous decision for Anthony Pettis winning the fight. Then, I would say the round that mattered the most here was the third round. More than anything else, it was back and forth action between Pettis and Cerrone for the first and second round here. You could say Cerrone won the first round. You can say Anthony Pettis won the second round. And then, by the third round, then it was obvious Anthony Pettis defeated Donald Cerrone then. But there's an asterisk to this, to some extent, in that the end of the fight ended off with Anthony Pettis poking Donald Cerrone's eye. And when the poke did happen, the referee didn't stop the fight, and Donald Cerrone's guard was down. And so since Donald Cerrone was talking to the referee being like, hey, my eye got poked, man, can we please take a break or stop? He's trying to communicate with the ref, he's trying to tell Anthony Pettis, but Anthony Pettis instead just went forward and sucker punched Cerrone. I didn't like that. I didn't like the fight ethics in that. And that Cerrone obviously got eye poked, and in the replay it shows that Cerrone got eye poked, which led to Donald Cerrone's guard being down, which led to Anthony Pettis pretty much pursuing and being active against Donald Cerrone, and it gave Anthony Pettis several couple free shots, which helped Anthony Pettis make his case into winning the third round. With that being said, though, how do I feel about the performances of these two? Donald Cerrone, by the way, he did a lot more better in this fight than the Conor McGregor fight. Donald fight a good fight. It's just that third round, though, for Donald Cerrone, it just, things didn't work out well for him. It just didn't with the eye poke. Also, Anthony Pettis, His counter punching was on point, though. For a lot of Don Cerrone was doing a lot of leg kicks on Anthony Pettis, while Anthony Pettis was responding with body kicks and also responding with quick counter strikes. Anthony Pettis' counter-striking ability was really on point here against Don Cerrone, and it was because of his patience and his ability to defend himself properly against Don Cerrone's jabs is the reason why Anthony Pettis was able to go defeat Don Cerrone in this fight. It's a very impressive victory for Anthony Pettis. Both these fighters are both coming off losses. Even then, both these fighters are actively really good. Don Cerrone's case into climbing up the rankings isn't all that damaged that much, because it's because that third round, also Cerrone had a really impressive performance against Pettis. There's nothing you can really do about that. Anthony Pettis showed a little bit of the old Anthony Pettis that we've been looking for the past couple years. Pettis has been going on a bad streak of losses, and this fight here was something that he definitely really needed here. So both fighters had a good performance. The third round was a complete game changer, to which Pettis poked Don Cerrone. Pettis won the fight via unanimous decision. And now, I don't know where these two fighters are going forward, though. Anthony Pettis can go on for a couple more years. Don Cerrone, we're unsure. He's talked about saying that he's only he's got 5 fights left in his tank. I feel really sad for that, because I feel like Cerrone has a lot to offer. And he gave a really good performance against Pettis, and I can't wait to see what happens for these two next. Now, the heavyweight fight then. There are 3 heavyweight fights in this entire card. And main card and the prelim. There's been a total of 3. And Fabricio Werdum versus Aleksei Oleinik. Fabricio Werdum came into this fight as the overwhelming favorite against Aleksei Oleinik here. I was questioning that because ring rust. While Dominic Cruz was able to persevere past ring rust, Dominic Cruz had a very impressive performance. They can say, okay, Cruz had a really great performance. I can see Cruz going forward and pushing forward and fighting against someone else. Fabricio Werdum, though, no. No, it really wasn't. This was the beginning of when Joe Rogan was constantly talking about breathing being a overarching thing throughout all these fights. Because this fight, more than any other fights, really was Werdum and Aleksei Oleinik. Once again, 2.5 minutes in. Werdum was gassed. The dude was gassed 2.5 minutes in. Aleksei Oleinik was a monster, going incredibly aggressive, and it wasn't the best performance for Werdum in this fight. I'll be looking into this fight a little bit more after the short break here. Once again, you listen to the GSMC MMA Podcast, coming back right after the short break.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup finals.
Listen now.
And we are back. So I'm talking about Aleksei Oleinik versus Fabricio Werdum, the prelim card on ESPN for UFC 249. This is one of 3 heavyweight fights in the entire card. And Werdum looked really bad in this fight here. He looked a wee bit out of shape, to be honest with you. He looked a wee bit out of shape. He didn't look like he was in fight shape. Aleksei Oleinik just bombarded Werdum immediately with aggressive strikes. In the predictions here, we were talking about why Werdum was a favorite to go defeat Oleinik, and Joe Rogan said it best, in that Werdum should defeat Aleksei Oleinik in every facet of the game. He should. Werdum was the better striker. He's got the better clinch game, better dirty boxing, better jiu-jitsu game, better wrestling game, better submission game. Fabricio Werdum, the reason why he was favorite going into the fight against Aleksei Oleinik was that Werdum has all the counters, he has all the tools to defeat Oleinik, and there wasn't a single thing Oleinik was specifically good at to go overcome Werdum. That was the prediction, and if we're talking about peak Werdum versus Oleinik, Werdum would have won this fight. But, talking about 2020 Werdum, coming off the USADA suspension, yikes, this was not good. Aleksei Oleinik was the one who was winning in all the striking exchanges. Werdum was able to go take down Oleinik and was able to attempt multiple submissions. Here's the thing. I would say if this fight were a 5-round fight, Werdum could have won this fight. He really could have. I would argue that the bell has saved Aleksei in the third round, Aleksei Oleinik in the third round, and that Werdum was going in for a guillotine choke, but the third round ended before Oleinik could go and properly get out of the position. He was in a bad position, so Werdum could have won the fight if the fight were to go on a little bit, like 1 more minute more. He could have won the third round, But at that point, then Alexei Oleinik was defending all the strikes properly. He was defending all the grappling. Verdum was able to go get a couple takedowns onto Oleinik, but because Oleinik's defense was so good, he was able to prevent Verdum from taking advantage of it. And Alexei Oleinik was obviously defeating Verdum in the striking exchanges. This led to Alexei Oleinik defeating Fabricio Verdum in an upset victory by split decision. And I feel sad for Verdum. Alexei Oleinik, good job on him. He's gonna go push his way through the division, being a proper journeyman. Fabricio Verdum, that was a very that was not an impressive performance at all. Actually, that was a very negative performance. I look negatively down on Fabricio Verdum more after this event, and I think Verdum should be in better fight shape. I really do think so. He looks significantly much larger than Alexei Oleinik. Rogan noted that, like, Alexei Oleinik usually comes. Alexei Oleinik is a pretty big fighter, and Verdum usually comes across as a smaller fighter compared to his opponents in the heavyweight division. But Verdum looked much more larger against Alexei Oleinik, and Verdum was not in fight shape. And hopefully for Verdum's next fight, we're going to see Verdum be in better shape. And we're going to see a better performance from Verdum because Alexei Oleinik completely dominated Verdum in the striking exchanges, which is an aspect of Verdum's game that I did not expect. And then the only women's fight of this card here, which was Carla Esparza versus Michelle Waterson. This fight was controversial. How controversial it is? Well, okay, so Carla Esparza defeated Michelle Waterson, but here are the scorecards. Esparza defeated Michelle Waterson via split decision. 30-27, Michelle Waterson. 29-28, Carla Esparza. 30-27, Carla Esparza. And then I saw the actual scorecard was posted on Twitter, and it just didn't make any sense. It really didn't. Like, I was trying to think about how did Esparza defeat Michelle Waterson in this, and I guess like the judges just scored high on Carla Esparza's aggressiveness and going for the takedowns. Because with the exception of one takedown, Michelle Waterson was able to defend every takedown and every clinch aspect of the game. Michelle Waterson was slowly pecking away Carla Esparza from a distance with her boxing and striking karate skills. I'd say one thing Carla Esparza did really well in this fight was overwhelming Michelle Waterson when she did win for the flurry. In the 50-50 exchanges, Carla Esparza won. She won all the 50-50 exchanges, to which Esparza was pressing forward on the action, and the fight became very tight-knit, which was what Esparza was best at in fights. She's really good at going very aggressive and trying to close in the distance against her opponents. Michelle Waterson, kind of like Imani Cicek, is really good at in a grind-out game, poking at her opponents. But I would say that Michelle Waterson's grind-outs poking game should have surpassed Carla Esparza's in close striking exchange, because yes, if Michelle Waterson and Esparza, if they were striking each other and they were both in close quarters, I say Esparza got maybe 1-2 strikes onto Michelle Waterson more than Waterson did on Esparza, and that shouldn't overtake the cumulative strikes that Michelle Waterson has had on Carla Esparza when it came to the outside the poking boxing. So it was a very questionable decision what happened then. It was so questionable that Michelle Waterson gave the O face to the camera. Like, the camera was on Michelle Waterson. And then Waterson, when she heard, 30-27, Carla Esparza wins by decision. Michelle Waterson looks at the camera, gave a shock face, her mouth went up what? You could have memed Waterson's face because it was such meme material. She looked so genuinely shocked because she probably was genuinely shocked. Carla Esparza, when it came to the decision, she looked really upset at herself. She didn't think she would actually win that fight. And it was 30-27, Carla Esparza. Esparza's like, what? I won? Yeah! And then Michelle Waterson looks at the camera going what? And then her ring crew, her corner men who were next to Michelle Waterson was like, what the heck? It was, it's a very controversial finisher. I thought Michelle Waterson should have won that fight. Once again, this is where I would love to have scorecards. I want to see, I would like to see the stats. What were the cumulative strikes? What were the significant strikes? And also, how much ground control did Carla Esparza had on Michelle Waterson? This isn't a case where it's Dominic Cruz versus Cody Garbrandt, where even though Dominic Cruz had more cumulative strikes onto Cody Garbrandt, it was painfully obvious that Garbrandt was winning in all the exchanges. He had more significant strikes onto his opponent. In this case, I don't think there was that much of a significant difference between Carla Esparza landing like heavy shots on Michelle Waterson versus the cumulative total number of Michelle Waterson had in her strikes on Esparza. So a controversial finish then. The sad part though is that Carla Esparza, that performance against Waterson wasn't all that impressive enough for her to slide her way into the top 5 of the rankings. And Michelle Waterson pretty much is stuck in her ranking. So nothing really is accomplished that much through this. For all we know, either of these two fighters could be fighting somebody higher up in the rankings, even though it really shouldn't make that much sense. It's strange. It really is. And then, personally, in my opinion, the fight of the nights, my personal fight of the nights, the winners of the Fight of the Night bonus here, Justin Gaethje versus Ferguson won Fight of the Night. They got the $50K bonus. The performance of the night was Justin Gaethje and Francis Ngannou. I agree with that critique there. I think Ngannou and Justin Gaethje both won performance of the night. Fight of the night was Justin Gaethje versus Ferguson. I say fight of the night was Vicente Luque versus Nico Price. That fight was just two warriors going at it, man. Oh, it was an incredibly impressive fight. It could have gone either way there. The reason why I say Vicente Luque versus Nico Price was the fight of the night compared to Justin Gaethje versus Tony Ferguson was that the Tony Ferguson versus Justin Gaethje fight was mostly a one-sided fight. For the most part, I say the large majority of parts, that fight was Gaethje wrecking Ferguson, while Luque versus Nico Price, that fight could have gone either way. If it were to go by decision and either fighter won, either fighter could have been like, you know what, that was unfair or whatever. But this fight here between Luque versus Nico Price was just as good, if not better, than Gaethje versus Ferguson. Vicente Luque defeated Nico Price. The fight ended via TKO on a doctor stoppage in the third round, 3 minutes and 37 seconds in. It was the right decision. But yeah, if you guys haven't seen it yet, I can't really talk that much about it though without really, I can't really explain Luque versus Nico Price. Luque versus Nico Price was Gaethje versus Tony Ferguson if it was a back and forth fight instead of one guy just completely dominating the dude. Nico Price and Luque came to the fight and they're walking out of it though with their faces all messed up, and it was an insanely fun fight. I highly recommend, even though it's in the lower end of popularity in terms of name recognition. Like, most people don't know Nico Price. Most people don't know Vicente Luque, but it was a really fun fight. I recommend all you guys to go watch it. If you can, it's a bloody war and one of the best fights of the entire year, without a doubt about it. And then, in the early preliminary card, I talked about this before, Bryce Mitchell versus Charles Rosa. That was an incredibly impressive performance by Bryce Mitchell. If you want to see an up and coming fighter move up the featherweight rankings in a very impressive way, I say Bryce Mitchell. So overall, UFC 249. It was a very fun card here. It was great. It was great to watch the mixed martial arts after a period of not watching any live sports really. Also, it was announced that George St. Pierre is finally going into the Hall of Fame. So if he's going to the Hall of Fame, is he gonna go and make a comeback? I'm not really sure. I think GSP still has the tools to do it though. But GSP is going to be inducted into the Hall of Fame, being known as a former UFC welterweight and middleweight champion, holding his belts accumulatively for over 2,000 days. George St. Pierre, no doubt about it, he's probably the greatest UFC fighter of all time. That's debatable, but he's probably the greatest UFC fighter of all time, and I'm really happy for him. So that does it for today's podcast here. If you guys haven't watched it yet, watch UFC 249. You guys are definitely going to enjoy it. Go watch replays of it online. Go watch highlights. Go order the pay-per-view. If you haven't watched UFC 249, I highly recommend it. You are not going to regret it. So thank you for listening to the GSMC MMA Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'd like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review. That really helps out. Also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you, and have a good night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts MMA Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.